Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at the Pentagon, where we are doing an exit interview with Ray Mabus, the 75th Secretary of the United States Navy, sir, and the third longest serving Secretary of the Navy after Gideon Wells and Josephus Daniels. Sir, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to meet with us.
Great to see you, Vago, and I'm really glad to be doing this.
It's an honor. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I want to start off. I mean, obviously, the election, is a matter of record. Donald Trump's the 45th president of the United States. That did come as a surprise to some, but his team has been working very, very closely. They've named a defense secretary. I know the landing teams have been in the building and they're meeting with folks. You're going to be meeting with the Navy team soon. What are some of the things that, as they form their plans, what are some of the priorities you're going to recommend that they take a look at as they prepare to take over?
Well, what I'm going to say, and what I've been saying publicly for a while now, is the Navy and the Marine Corps are substantially different than they were 8 years ago, but they're also significantly stronger. And I think the platform that we've given them that is going to be passed along is significant in what it offers for the future. I'll start out with ships. When I got here, we were down in the 270s. In 2001, the U.S. Navy had 316 ships. By 2008, 7 years later, after one of the big military buildups in our history, we were down to 278 ships. In those 7 years, the Navy put 41 ships under contract. Now, 41 ships is not enough to keep our fleet from continuing to shrink, and it wasn't enough to keep our shipyards in business. I've been there 7 fiscal years now, and in the same time, so 41 ships from 01 to 08, from 09 to 16, 86 ships put under contract, done with a 20% smaller overall top line. So we'll grow the fleet. We'll get back to 300 ships by 2019. We'll get to 308 ships, which is our assessed need today, by 2021. One of the messages is you can't miss a year building a ship. If you do, it's gone forever. Building ships are not like weapon systems or even aircraft or people. You can throw money at those things and get them geared up very fast. You can't do it with ships. You can't do it because of the capacity in our shipyards. You can't do it because of the time that it takes. So the fleet size that I'm living with today is based on decisions made 2005, 2003, 2000. So if they want to continue to grow the fleet, which I think we need to do, and our force structure assessment that's going to be coming out soon, is almost certainly going to be higher than 308 ships. They're going to have to continue to do this. They're going to have to continue to build at least the rate we've been building at. But every one of our shipyards has a hot line. Every one of our shipyards has geared up in terms of training, in terms of infrastructure investments, in terms of hiring employees. We have not done it at the expense of aircraft. We're recapitalizing every single aircraft line across the Navy and the Marine Corps. We bought 35% more aircraft in these 7 years than in the 7 previous years. And we've protected R&D money and science and technology money so that we're putting the most advanced weapons systems on these aircraft, on these ships, because I don't ever want to send sailors and Marines into a fair fight. So I think that there's a great basis laid. Building ships, building aircraft, doing weapons is not the job of one secretary. It's not the job of one administration. If you let it slide, it's not going to affect you. I mean, we could not build another ship, and we'll hit 308 in 2021. And I guarantee you, whoever the Secretary of the Navy is in 2021 will say, look at what I did. I got to 308 ships. That person will not have had one thing to do with getting to 308. But if that person doesn't make the same decisions, doesn't build the ships, then the Secretary of the Navy and the President in 2031, in 2035, is going to be in big trouble. So that's one thing. A second thing is on our force. We have the best force we have ever had. They're the rightful heirs to the Marines that fought across the Pacific and in Korea and in Vietnam and in Iraq and in Afghanistan. We've got the greatest Navy, not only in our history, the rightful heirs to the Navy that defended the North Atlantic, that in World War I, that fought across the Pacific in World War II. We've got the greatest Navy and Marine Corps ever in the history of the world. It's the most formidable expeditionary fighting force ever. But we've stressed it a lot. And some of the things that we've undertaken, promoting more on merit, less on time, doing the career and mission program so that you can take up to 3 years off to do anything. You owe us 2 for 1 back, but you can have a family, you can look after a loved one, you can go get another degree without hurting your career. Making it more flexible. I triple paid maternity leave because we were losing twice as many women as men from year 6 to year 12. And that's a readiness issue because if you lose a submariner, if you lose an aviator, if you lose a surface warfare, if you lose an intel, you have to start over with somebody brand new, and all that investment, those millions of dollars that's gone into training, is gone. It's a much more diverse force today than it was 8 years ago. I brought ROTC back to Harvard, to Yale, to Princeton, to Columbia, but I also started it at Rutgers and Arizona State, the 2 most diverse campuses in this country. And it's not diversity for diversity's sake, but it's diversity of thought, of experience, of background. And if you become too homogenous, if you look too much the same and are from too much the same background, you become too predictable. And a more predictable military force is a defeatable military force. And so it's that diversity that makes us a much, much stronger force than we ever have been before. Third is we're changing the way the Navy and Marine Corps acquire and use energy, power. If you want to see how energy can be used as a weapon, just look at what Russia did when they moved into Crimea. Look at what Russia tried to do to Ukraine and to Europe. I didn't want that to be used against us. When I came into office, oil was at $140 a barrel, and we were losing a Marine, killed or wounded, for every 50 convoys of fuel we took into Afghanistan. That's way too high a price to pay, either one of those. And so that was the reason I came up with the alternative energy goals. It wasn't to be green, it was to make us better warfighters. And so the goal is 50% on shore, 50% at sea by 2020. We got there on shore last year in 2015. More than 50% of our energy for our bases today comes from alternative sources. We're working on microgrids so that if the grid goes down, we can pull ourselves off the grid and still do our military responsibilities. We're at about 35% at sea. Half of that's nuclear. The rest of it is things like biofuels. And the reason you do that, the example I give is in Singapore. There are 2 refineries. One's an oil refinery owned by the Chinese. Right down the road is a biofuel refinery owned by a Finnish company. I don't want to be dependent on China for our fuel in the Western Pacific. I don't want to be dependent on one source of fuel or one place to get fuel. And if you look at our allies, we've got 9 countries now that are using biofuels. If you look at our airline industry, the commercial airline industry, it's cost competitive now. And so it makes us better warfighters. And finally, we're getting way more efficient. Navy oil usage is down 15%. Marine Corps oil usage is down 62% in the last 8 years. Now, part of that's coming out of Afghanistan. But part of it is...
Well, and Iraq also, right? I mean,
and
there's
Iraq,
a smaller
yes.
footprint in Iraq.
But after even factoring those things in, things like giving Marines rollable solar panels to power their radios and their GPSs saves a company of Marines 700 pounds of batteries that they don't have to carry. And it also, they don't have to be resupplied with those things. We've got SEAL teams in the field now, net zero in terms of energy and water. They're using things like solar power to purify water, so they can stay out almost indefinitely. We're building hybrid ships that have an electric drive for speeds under 12 knots, regular marine diesel for speeds over 12 knots. Macon Island was the first one of these, big deck amphib. Its first deployment, it brought back almost half its fuel budget, and it stayed at sea 44 days longer than anybody else in the amphibious ready group. So if you don't continue those, you're going to risk marine lives. The time a Navy ship is the most vulnerable is when it's refueling. You're going to make our Navy and Marine Corps dependent on people who may not have our best interest at heart in terms of getting energy. And so I think those things are important to continue. And finally, our partnerships around the world. I mean, I've traveled a lot. It's mainly to see our sailors and Marines where they're deployed. And that's one of the recommendations I would make. Don't stay here in the Pentagon. Get out, talk to sailors, talk to Marines, go around the fleet. They will tell you what their concern is. They also have more innovation and more ideas than we ever would here. And so we've tried to tap into that innovation. I've set up task force innovation. We've got a crowdsourcing platform. We're funding a lot of these things. Get those ideas from the deck plates, but then get the best ones out around the fleet. But also work with our foreign friends, our allies, in terms of exercises, in terms of operations, in terms of training together. You can surge people, you can surge equipment. What you can't surge is trust. You have to have those exercises. You have to have those operations together. You have to have people knowing each other and how each other functions in peacetime, so that in the case of a crisis, you're ready to go. You don't have to start over. So those are the things that I would recommend. I think that, again, there's been a great basis laid. The Navy and Marine Corps are in a better place than they've been in a long, long time. But it's not you can't just do it in one administration. You can't just do it in one secretary's term. You have to do it year in, year out, all the time, every day, or you will lose that edge. You will lose that combat effectiveness. And so we're in good shape, but it's always a race.
I want to ask you, I mean, one of the things that has been a challenge, and you've lived with it for your entire tenure, as the whole department has, under budgetary pressure. The Budget Control Act being obviously the sharpening of that focus and the spending caps that were triggered. What's the impact of the Budget Control Act been on the force as you hand over the keys?
Well, number one, it keeps us from planning very long. I mean, Congress fixes it 2 years at a time, but we do 5-year budgets. You've got to give things like shipyards a long-term view of things. The other thing that's happened is we had sequester. It actually went into effect in 2013. That was the year we had a government shutdown as well. We had a hiring freeze because of sequester. And because of that, we fell way behind on our maintenance for aircraft. Marines today, half Marine aircraft not in reportable condition. So,
and the accident rates are up in part because
well,
of the
but we don't send people up in unsafe aircraft. But there's just not enough for training. I mean, the people that are deployed and the next to go have all the equipment they need. The people that are the ones after that, the training, we simply don't have enough. And it's because of what happened in 2013. It's because of sequester. It's because of the government shutdown. It's because of the hiring freeze and all the things that went with this. So it's going to be 2019 before we can get those aircraft. Same thing with ship maintenance. We have steamed these ships way beyond what we thought we would. It's one of the reasons to build more ships, because we've been double pumping, sending ships out after not long enough maintenance availabilities. When they do come back in, you open them up, they got problems that you never expected. So the next maintenance period, the next shipyard period is longer, it's more expensive, and we're trying to get that more normalized. And one of the ways you do that is have enough ships to to get all the ships that you need forward, all the ships to do the job for America. But it's also caused a lot of uncertainty with the force. I mean, one of the questions I get the most is, what's our force going to be? Are we going to be able to build the ships? Are we going to have the sailors and Marines that we need? Are we going to have to cut? What's going to happen to basically the force? Because there is no certainty. And I hope that Congress will get rid of the Budget Control Act so that you can plan. Now, one of the things I will say, we're building that many more ships, more than twice as many as in the previous 7 years, and building that many more aircraft than in the previous 7 years with a lot less money. But
you traded away people in order to do that
No,
as well.
we did not. We didn't. The Navy was drawn down in those 7 years. The Navy has not been drawn down in terms of people since I've been there. The Marines have been drawn down from the surge. They surged in 2006, 2007 into Iraq. They went from 175 to 202. They're coming down, and they will be at 182.5 now. However, that's not the way we've done that. We've driven down the cost of every single ship dramatically. I mean, Littoral Combat Ships are costing half of what they were before, and they're better ships today. Our submarines, we signed a multi-year contract for 10 submarines over 5 years in 2014. We paid for 9. We got a free submarine, and that's a $2 billion savings. Our destroyers, we're saving $300 million per ship because of competition between Pascagoula, Huntington Ingalls, and Bath Iron Works. So the cost of these things, and the next aircraft carrier will cost $2 billion less than the one that was just built. And so we're driving the cost down. We're driving the cost of these ships down. We're driving the cost of virtually every aircraft program down. And we've looked at other things too. I mean, we've got about a $160 billion budget. It's been going around that. $44 billion of that every year is in contracts. It's everything from IT to mowing the grass. We couldn't tell you when I came into here, you couldn't follow a dollar from when it was appropriated by Congress through to where it went. You just couldn't do it. Today you can. And we set up something called contract courts, which says that every year, every contracting officer has to bring in all their contracts, and they've got to defend them. Do you still need this? Has it been bid out lately? What's the purpose of this? And there are people that sit there and question it. From $44 billion 3 years ago, we're at $33 billion today. We've saved $11 billion a year just by doing that. And so that's the way we've been able to do this. It hasn't been by sacrificing people. It's been by driving a harder bargain. It's been by, but it's also been by being more transparent, by letting shipyards know, letting the aircraft manufacturers know, here's what we're going to buy, here's when we're going to buy it, and here's what we expect from you.
And I want to get into this in terms of some of the trade-offs, right? Because some of the ships, like Littoral Combat Ship, is a smaller ship. You can buy more numbers of them to augment the numbers of the fleet, and I want to get into that discussion in a minute. But President-elect Trump has already said that he wants to repeal the Budget Control Act. The Republican on the House and Senate side both have expressed interest in getting rid of it, and it looks like there'd be more money. If you were the guy who was spending that more money, where would you spend it? Would you spend it on more destroyers? Would you spend it on more attack submarines? How would you spend more people? What are the things that you would spend that extra money on? And does it need to be 350 ships from your perspective in terms of a goal?
I'm pretty sure, I'm absolutely sure that we do a force structure assessment every 3 or 4 years. The last one we did was in 2012. That's the one that came up with 308 ships. The world has changed since then. Then you didn't have the resurgent Russia. Then you didn't have China doing the stuff it's doing. Then you didn't have ISIS. They didn't exist at that point. So I know it's going to be bigger than 308, and we're going to come out with the force structure assessment pretty soon.
The fleet architecture. That's
And there are 3 different studies that we're looking at. But in answer to your question, you can't build one kind of ship, and we're building a balanced fleet today. You can't pump up the numbers with littoral combat ships. I mean, they're taking the place of the frigate, which was also a smaller ship. And the new littoral combat ships are designated as frigates because they're going to be much more heavily armed. They're going to be much more defensible. But you've got to keep building surface combatants. You've got to keep building carriers. You've got to keep building attack submarines. And we've got to recapitalize the ballistic missile submarines, our nuclear deterrent submarines, starting in 2021. So you can't say, okay, we're going to build more of these and fewer of these. One of the things that I've been pretty steadfast about is you don't pay for one Navy ship with another Navy ship. That's just a fool's errand, because you've got to have that balanced fleet. I mean, the new frigates, the old littoral combat ships, bring an amazing capability to the fleet that nobody else can do. But you've also got to have your DDGs. Our cruisers are going to begin to go out of service in the late 2020s and into the 2030s. We've extended their life, we've modernized them, but you're going to have the next large surface combatant. What's that going to look like? Same thing with aircraft. You never want one generation of aircraft on the deck, and we've got the Joint Strike Fighter coming in for both the Navy and the Marine Corps, but the next one is almost certainly going to be unmanned, and doing that development, doing that engineering, getting ready for that. So you can't just look at one thing. And so you got to build a balanced fleet. I'm clearly for a bigger fleet. I mean, I like building ships, and I think that America needs those ships.
And, well, there's nothing to be embarrassed about that. I mean,
No.
I think ultimately at the end of the day,
I'm the Secretary of the Navy.
You're the Secretary of the Navy, exactly. If Eric Fanning had been sitting here talking about ships, that would be an interesting thing.
But I don't think we've got the size force that we need in the Navy. You can tweak it a little bit here and there. We've put a lot more people into cyber, for example. Same thing with the Marines. I've seen the Commandant's been talking about if he had more Marines, it wouldn't go into some of the traditional things. It would go into more cyber, more special forces, things like that, more aligned with the way we fight today, more aligned with the way we're going to have to fight in the future.
I want to move to the budget question, because obviously your passion for driving ships has been the reason for some discord between you and the Defense Secretary regarding the $17 billion delta between how much more money you want and the target you've been given. But I want to back up a minute and ask you about LCS. You've been a passionate advocate for the Littoral Combat Ship. Bob Work, when he was your deputy, was also a passionate advocate for that. He's now the Deputy Secretary. How do you respond to those who look at that ship and say, look, that was born at a time when we were talking about Persian Gulf, we were talking about the littorals. Right now the challenge is in the Pacific, in the Western Pacific specifically, that the LCS is a short-range ship, a short-legged ship that puts speed and the drive for speed over range. Anybody who's been in an engine room knows the more spacious the engine room, the more easily it's worked in. LCS is a very densely packed engine room that's hard to service, particularly underway. How do you respond to those? And I think you've hinted at this, where you've said the fate of LCS will be determined by the next administration. Is that the right ship, or does the next administration fundamentally need to come in there and reconsider what it is, what kind of long-legged ships we may need for the potential conflicts we may be getting into, which will be very, very far from U.S. shores?
Well, I'll give you two answers. I'll give you the answer on LCS, but then I'll give you the answer on the other question.
I'm happy to take as many answers as you give me.
Well, number one, LCS gives the fleet capabilities it doesn't have today. And if you want to know why we need the LCS in the Pacific, ask the commander of the Pacific Fleet. Ask the commander of 7th Fleet. as the commander of Third Fleet. And they will all say, this gives us distributed lethality. This makes any adversary, makes their job much, much harder. The counter submarine capabilities that the LCS and particularly the frigate will have, the frigate version will have, is unmatched. And a DDG can't do it. The counter mine capabilities, nobody can do that today. The counter surface capability. You put these LCSs out there, you put them with a strike group, or you put them doing other things. It complicates to a dramatic degree an adversary. And I mean, I've heard the criticism of LCS. I've also looked back at every single new ship the Navy has bought since the 1960s, every one of them. And every time, for 5 or 10 years, GAO, Congress, people in this building have just gone after them.
The press.
The press. I was trying to leave you guys out of this, but...
oh, include me. Come on, why not?
And so, you know, when the frigate was being brought into the fleet in the early 80s, one report said, any sailor that goes aboard the frigate ought to get submarine pay because these things are going to sink. Well, they became one of the real workhorses of the fleet. Anytime you've got a new ship, and particularly a new concept ship, which this is, number one, you're going to have mechanical problems. There's just going to be issues. One of the things, we deployed LCS way before we've ever deployed another ship. And Freedom went out first to Singapore. And it got a lot of press when it was unavailable for duty because of mechanical issues. One of the things that nobody pointed out was it was available for duty at a higher percentage rate than the rest of 7th Fleet. Navy ships have to have maintenance. Navy ships break. Navy ships have to go into port and do these things. In terms of legs, first time we sent LCS to the Western Pacific, it got there with about a third of the fuel that we thought it was going to use. Navy ships get refueled all the time. But the main thing there is those ships shouldn't be back here. Navy ships in San Diego, Navy ships in Norfolk, Navy ships in Mayport aren't going to be much use in a future fight. It's going to happen so fast. And that's why presence, that's why being forward deployed, that's why having those ships in a place like Singapore, having those ships, having the DDGs in Rota, Spain, having ships, we have 100 ships today forward deployed. Having those ships out there, it's not going to be going from San Diego to wherever you fight. It's going to be much closer, or it better be, because a ship in San Diego is not going to get to the fight. And that's what the Navy sort of uniquely gives to this country and the Marine Corps, is presence, is being around the globe, around the clock, giving options, deterring. You know, a lot of times phase 0, which is before any fighting starts, make your potential adversary think about this twice, because there's the Navy, there are those gray hulls on the horizon. In answer to your second question, should we start over, start looking again? We've done that. We did that 3 years ago. When we did the study, we looked at 14,000 designs for small surface combatants. And, you know, for utility and also cost. Because these ships are coming in at under 500 million apiece. We upgun them. You know, everyone is going to have far more weapons and things like towed array sonar. They're going to have an over-the-horizon missile to make them far more lethal from a greater distance. They're going to be more heavily armored, although the best way to be survivable is don't get hit. And speed helps there a lot. But if you started over today, it would be at least a decade before you could bring another ship into the fleet. It would be far more costly than than the LCS. I mean, we looked at these things. We looked at changing the design. We looked at doing other things. And when you add weight, when you add armaments, when you add this sort of thing, basically you get to a destroyer, which are costing almost $2 billion a piece now. And so you can do that, but number one, you can't build enough of them quickly enough. Number two, if you do a new design, it just takes a long time. Number three, you'll have issues with that design, whatever it is. And number four, this ship has all the capabilities. And I mean, don't take my word for it. Take the Navy's word. I mean, in the last force structure assessment, said we needed 52 of these. That was done by the fleets. That was done by the operators. That wasn't done inside the Pentagon. And so, again, go ask the commander of 7th Fleet. Go ask the commander of Pacific Fleet. Go ask Fleet Forces Command. Go ask 5th Fleet in terms of what this ship will bring day to day and what this ship will bring to the fight. And it's an impressive ship.